Welcome to Storytime ASMR with me, Neil Winters. This is episode 2. Thank you for joining me, and let's get going. Before we begin, take a minute to relax your body and mind. Adjust yourself in bed so that you are comfortable wherever you are lying. Feel the covers over your body create a cozy cocoon around you. Feel the pillow shape itself around your head and cradle you in its embrace. Now, let's start with your breathing. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Fill your lungs with the replenishing air, and now exhale the contents of your lungs. Inhale again. Fill your lungs. Fill with air. The breath of life. Now exhale again. Feel today's tensions and worries start to slip away and exit your body with your out breath. Take a cleansing breath in. And exhale more of today's tensions and worries. This is your opportunity to focus on yourself and your relaxation and your relationship with the cosmos. Continue to take cleansing breaths. As you breathe in and out, notice today's worries and concerns slip away with each breath. Now focus on your body, starting with your feet and toes. Stretch your feet, lifting your toes up. If you are able to, curl your toes tightly and feel the day's tensions build in them. Release your toes and feel the tension slipping away. Tighten your calves and take a deep breath in. Hold that tightness and tension for a moment. Relax your calves and exhale. As you exhale, feel your body continue to relax. Tighten your core. Take in a breath. Release your breath and your tightened core. Now ball up your hands into fists. Tighter. Breathe in. And release your breath and relax your hands. Stretch your fingers and relax them. Flex your shoulders backwards and roll them. Breathe in. Breathe out. Relax and release. Shrug your shoulders and acknowledge any tension you may be feeling there. Take a deep breath in and release a big sigh into the air. And relax your shoulders. Continue breathing in and out, relaxing breaths while I tell you a story. During my adolescence, my family owned a boat. It was a white, tri-hull, 17-foot open-bow Sea Sprite with black lettering and black pinstriping on the outside. It had brown seats that would heat up in the sun almost to the point of burning us, and fortunately had a bimini to protect the seats and us from the heat of the day. The motor was a green-gray outboard 125 horsepower Evinrude. Because the gas tank in the boat was rather small, my dad had external orange gas tanks that he would store at the back of the boat and connect to the outboard motor when the main tank was low on fuel. We had two favorite destinations to go boating when I was a kid. One was Huntington Reservoir in Huntington, Utah. The other was Lake Powell in southeastern Utah. Our favorite destination at Lake Powell was Height Marina, the northernmost marina on the lake. That marina is now non-existent because the water level of the lake is so low that only a small remnant of the Colorado River runs through it. But when I was a kid in the early 80s, it was full and beautiful. When we drove to the lake from our home, we went through the little town of Hanksville, Utah. Between Hanksville and Height, the road wound like a curvy ribbon through the red sandstone rocks and canyons of southern Utah. The drive time from Hanksville to Height Marina was about an hour long. The total drive time from our town in east central Utah was about 3 hours. To this day, I still measure all of my long-distance drives based on the drive time from the home of my youth to Lake Powell. I'm now almost 50 years old. Back to the trip between Hanksville and Height. Like I said, the drive was about an hour. When we were close to halfway between Hanksville and Height, the road became quite curvy as it ran along what is called the North Wash, which was a tributary of the Colorado River that met up at Height. More often than not, it was bone dry, but it was always recognizable because the road rose in relation to the bottom when the curves began. At the point where the North Wash became more visible, we had a game we liked to play, which was to guess the number of curves in the road until we would first see the lake. The final curve before we saw the lake was never the same curve because the lake level rose and fell with the changing seasons. As we'd go around each curve, we'd make sure we counted the entire length of the curve. 1, 2, 3, and so on. Then we'd eventually see the lake after 20 or so curves. At the top of the road, before it descended to Lake Powell, there was a scenic overlook above Height. This scenic overlook is the basis by which I still judge scenic overlooks along highways. When we reached the road at the top of the Red Rock Canyon, which was about to take a hard left, there was an exit lane to the right for the scenic overlook. One of my first memories of Lake Powell was pulling off the main road to the scenic overlook. The view welcoming us as we approached the lookout was mesmerizing. To the left, we saw the road we were just on as it descended down to lake level through cutouts in the rock. It made a wide arc around the lake until at the opposite side, about 3 or 4 miles across from the overlook, it crossed the Dirty Devil River and the Colorado River. The bridges over those two rivers were spectacular to behold from our vantage point. In fact, I felt a certain connection to them because my granddad was a foreman on the crew that erected them years and years before. I took a certain amount of pride in seeing the results of his hard labors. The bridge over the Dirty Devil was gray. It was an arch bridge with the arch going underneath the road deck and being anchored to the beach-colored sandstone rising vertically 100 feet above the water. We could see the plethora of rocky islands protruding from the water as the river exited the canyon and ran into the main channel of the lake. About a mile past the Dirty Devil was the Colorado River and an arched bridge traversing it. This time, the arch was above the road deck and anchored into red sandstone cliffs rising 150 feet above the water. As with the Dirty Devil, we could see the winding Colorado River approaching the main channel. At this time in history, the Colorado River didn't look like a river because it was part of the lake that was 100 feet deep. As our gaze continued along the road, traversing the beach-colored sandstone, we saw where it turned onto the roadway that took it to Height Marina and the boat ramp. Surrounding Height Marina were 100-foot-tall red sandstone cliffs. As I looked at the boat ramp, I saw the blue waters of Lake Powell extending out into the main channel and away from me south towards the dam, which was 120 miles away. The aqua blue water shimmered with gold reflections of the sun as we saw the small ripples of waves gently lapping across it. I contemplated the fact that even though the boat we were about to use would be floating, the water reached a depth of 50 to 100 feet, and that was a long way to sink. I felt a lot of gratitude for a floating boat. Looking at the immensity of the lake, I thought it would never run dry and would always be full. My dad at the time said that the prognosticators thought that in 30 years or so, it would be full of silt and it would be difficult to launch and operate a boat. When I was 8 years old, 30 years sounded like forever, and I thought that it would never happen. I was wrong, and my dad was right. It's been 40 years, and the lake is pretty full of silt, and it is now impossible to launch a boat at height. When I was really young, my parents purchased a camper to go on the bed of their yellow Chevy truck and house our family while at Lake Powell. This was in the early 80s when there were only 4 or 5 of us in the family, and it provided adequate sleeping space for all of us. My little brothers and my favorite thing to do when my parents had the camper, and before seatbelt laws were really a thing, was to ride in the camper while we drove to and from Lake Powell. We would climb on the bed above the truck cab, home to my parents' double-sized blue sleeping bag, and watch the road as it moved gently below us. We would take in the sagebrush and the rock formations that had been pushed up and out of the ground by plate tectonics eons ago. Sometimes we'd see pronghorn antelope running next to the road as they foraged for food among the sagebrush. Sometimes we'd see a Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad freight train lumbering along the tracks as it traveled between Grand Junction, Colorado, and Salt Lake City, Utah. Most of the roads we drove on between our hometown and Hanksville were flat and accompanied by vast open range to the right and left. Our second favorite marina to visit at Lake Powell was Bullfrog Marina. It was about 30 miles south of Height Marina and was always more crowded. But it did have a benefit in the earlier part of the year, and that there wasn't as much driftwood floating and presenting an opportunity to ruin the boat. The summer I turned 8 years old, my parents decided to take us on a trip to Bullfrog. We would camp in our green canvas tent on the beach for 3 or 4 days and visit all over the area. Because my youngest 2 brothers were 2 and 3, my parents decided to invite our 13-year-old neighbor to help with grown-up supervision. In case you're wondering, we had gotten rid of the camper at this time. How do I know it was the summer I turned 8 years old? Well, I grew up Mormon, and when you turn 8, you get baptized. One of the activities we engaged in while at the lake was practicing for my baptism, which was to take place that October. We wanted to be prepared, and I wanted to feel comfortable being dunked under the water. There are several memorable parts of that trip that I want to talk about here, from visiting Rainbow Bridge to water skiing and everything in between. It was a wonderful trip. As I said, one of the first things I remember from that trip was learning how I was going to be baptized. Because we were camping on the beach, we left the boat tied up in the water rather than take it out of the lake at the end of each day. One of the days we were there, my parents were telling me all about being baptized as we stood in the emerald green water next to the beached boat. I was the oldest and had never seen a baptism before and was naturally curious. So my dad placed his left arm in front of me. I grabbed his forearm with my left hand while he held my right hand close to my nose in his left hand. He mimicked saying the baptismal words, pushed my hand to my nose so I could plug it, and bent me backwards into the water while holding my back. It was pretty smooth, and as a result, I was prepared when the time actually came to be baptized for real. I am no longer Mormon, but that was a big experience for me as a child. During our several trips to Lake Powell before this one, I had learned a lot about a formation called Rainbow Bridge and that it would be a neat thing to see one day. This trip presented my first opportunity to see it. I remember wondering what it would look like and picturing a road bridge crossing the lake. I was wrong because Rainbow Bridge is actually a large red sandstone arch spanning the width of a canyon above the lake. The day we were going to see Rainbow Bridge was built up by my parents so that I lost sleep the night before from excited anticipation. We got up early and had my favorite Lake Powell breakfast, homemade cinnamon twists and a large glass of milk. Cinnamon twists were basically bread dough twisted, covered in cinnamon and sugar, and baked. They weren't the healthiest of choices, but they were beyond yummy. Our snacks of choice as we went about our days at Lake Powell were Chips Ahoy cookies and homemade wagon wheel cookies. The wagon wheel cookies were chocolate cookie dough baked with chopped walnuts glazed in powdered sugar. These were good choices because they didn't melt easily in the 100 plus degree Fahrenheit, 38 degree plus Celsius temperatures of Lake Powell. Of course, that was a dry heat because Lake Powell is in the middle of a desert. But dry or humid heat, it was still miserable at times. We would regularly stop whatever we were doing to get in the water and cool off, especially if we started experiencing signs of heat exhaustion. Back to the story. That morning, we woke up and had breakfast, then it was time to head to Rainbow Bridge. As I said, the tank in our little boat wasn't too large, so we had to stop at the marina and fill it up, along with the additional orange external tanks my dad had brought along with us. We got in the boat and left the cove where we were camping bright and early because of the long journey ahead of us. The sun was just rising over the sandy-colored rocks across the lake, and the water looked like glass because it was so smooth. As we left the shore, my dad pushed on the accelerator and the boat got up to cruising speed. I was sitting in the open bow at the front of the boat, feeling the air whistling through my hair and over my ears as we moved along. Because of the lack of wind, natural wind, the air rushing past me was quietly loud. I could hear the roaring of the engine along with a constant dull hum of wind as we cut through the water. We eventually got to Bullfrog Marina and the filling docks. We pulled up to the dock and the worker grabbed our boat and guided us in to the fill station and to fill the depleted internal and external tanks. He asked, "Do you want outboard fuel?" My dad said yes, and we all then exited the boat to go to the floating general store while the gentleman filled our boat. The store was fun to visit because it had all of the things a young voyager at Lake Powell would want. It was air conditioned so that we were protected from the heat. It had Lake Powell gear, and it had ice cream. The Lake Powell gear consisted of postcards with colorful photographs of the lake, along with Lake Powell t-shirts with overlays of water skiers or arches or just water emblazoned across them. My favorite shirt that my parents got me was light blue with Lake Powell proudly printed on the front. Some of the other things the Lake Powell general stores had that I remember seeing as I got older were instructional VHS tapes on how to improve at water skiing, shot glasses, and soda pop. 9 times out of 10, we went in the general store. We came away with chocolate-covered ice cream in our hands. The other thing that regularly accompanied us around the docks was carp fish. I think of carp as the trash fish of Lake Powell. We would throw almost anything in the water when we saw them, and one of them would try to eat it. I would throw bits of my ice cream in the water and watch a fish gobble it up. The vanilla ice cream would pass through their mouths and filter out their gills in hazes of white smoke. I wouldn't be surprised if we judiciously put cookies into the water without my parents seeing us. We never caught the carp because they were big and ugly and apparently not very good eating. They looked like gigantic green goldfish, almost like koi. After we had purchased our ice cream and the boat was filled with outboard gasoline, it was time for us to be on our way to Rainbow Bridge. I had no idea what to expect along the journey or what to expect when we got there. My family was a water skiing family, so as soon as we got away from the marina and into the main channel, my mom decided it was time for her to water ski. That was a great idea because it gave us something to do while we were on our way. My mom had a brown wooden Connolly ski. She used that water ski from the time I was a young child until she finally stopped water skiing 40 years later. Her and her ski were inseparable when we were on the boat. So my dad stopped the boat and it was time for my mom to get ready. She stripped down to her swimsuit and put on her gray life jacket. While my mom was getting ready, my dad was preparing the ski rope. It was yellow and green and had 2 handles. My dad gathered the rope, held it about 3 feet above the handles to his side, and began swinging it. After a couple of swings around, he released it into the air, handles flying, and it landed with a gentle splash in the water. Once the rope had landed, my mom handed my dad her ski and told him to place it in the water and not throw it. She wanted to ease herself into the water rather than dive in and chase the ski. Being the kind soul that he was, my dad placed the ski in the water and my mom made her way to the side of the boat. She gently lowered herself in, avoiding getting her hair wet, and immediately a scream escaped her lungs because it was still so cold. Not to worry though, because she soon felt a warm spot where she was floating. She put on the ski and my dad started the engine. He slowly pulled away from her while the rope ran through her hands until the handles reached them. He slowed the boat to an idle, and my mom set herself up in the water and was ready for him to accelerate. When she was situated just right, she yelled, "Hit it," and off we went. She popped right up on that ski, left leg and back, and began her 15 minutes of total personal exhilaration. My mom always took long turns skiing because she loved it so much. She started skiing when she was a child, and that love saw her through to her 50s and 60s. We watched her ski, gently cutting outside one side of the lake to outside the other. She never had a rooster tail behind her because her goal in skiing was one of endurance rather than one of showing off. She'd stay behind the boat, then gradually lean to her right and cross the wake, going out as far from the wake as possible, until she'd reach the apex of her arc and then head back towards the wake. She let the momentum of the rope pull her back into the wake. She'd cross the wake and, without stopping, continue to the other side and out to the left side of the boat, where, once again, she'd reach the apex of the arch and let the momentum of the rope pull her into the wake. This pattern continued for about 15 minutes. It was wonderful for her, but pretty boring for me. My brother and I were assigned to watch her so that we could notify my dad when she was done or if she suddenly fell. Because the water was so smooth, I felt the loud silence of the air passing across my ears, while the engine gently roared in the background. I would occasionally put my arm over the side of the boat to feel the splash of the water hitting my hand while we cruised along towards Rainbow Bridge. My mom eventually finished skiing and let go of the rope. My brother and I told my dad that Mom is done, and he turned the boat around to pick her up. We got to my mom, my dad cut the engine and grabbed her ski as she was holding it out for him. While he was pulling the ski in the boat, my responsibility was to put the ladder over the side of the boat for her to climb in. The funny thing about water skiing is that the water may seem like 32 degrees when you first get in, but after you're done skiing, it feels pretty warm. I don't know why that is. So in other words, my mom was plenty warm when she got back in the boat. At that point, my dad said that he would like a turn skiing. Of course, my mom said. My mom got in the boat, put her ski away, and toweled off while my dad stripped down to his bathing suit and put on his yellow life jacket. He pulled his orange fiberglass ski from the side of the boat and threw it in the water, not gently, where it floated several feet away. He dove in after it and surfaced right next to it. He didn't yell, but did inform us that he too had come across another warm spot in the water. Thank goodness for those warm spots. While he put on his ski, my mom put on her clothes to protect her from the burning sun and started the boat engine. She idled away from my dad as the rope passed through his hands until it was taut with him on one side and the boat at the other. He yelled, "Hit it," and we were off once again. This time, it took a bit longer for the boat to reach cruising speed because my dad enjoyed putting a lot of downward pressure on his back left leg while we accelerated. This caused a dragging effect while the engine worked overtime to get him up and going. I have to be honest, watching my dad ski was more fun than watching my mom ski. His turns weren't as long because he liked to show off, much to my and my brother's appreciation. He started in the wake and suddenly changed directions, cutting to his right. He reached the apex of the rope length and quickly changed directions back towards the wake. A huge rainbow-shaped rooster tail shot up behind him as he cut left. He approached the wake at what seemed like an incredible speed and suddenly changed directions again. Again, a giant rooster tail shot up behind him, and it was beautiful to behold as he leaned inches from the surface of the water. I was in awe and wanted to be able to do the same thing someday. He reached the apex of the turn once again and headed back towards the wake. This time there would be no turning back, as his momentum caused him to jump when he hit the wake, landing about halfway across to the other side. Without stopping his cut, he accelerated out the left side of the wake and jumped it as well. He zoomed to the end of the apex of the arc and cut back towards the wake, a huge rooster tail flying up behind him. He shot back to the wake and jumped it once again. I found watching my dad to be incredibly exciting, and I wanted nothing more than to be able to do the same thing when I grew up. My parents had bought me children-sized water skis the Christmas before, so I was anxious to learn to ski on this trip. When my dad finished with his turn, I asked when I would get to learn to ski. "Not right now," was the reasonable response. After all, we were in a busy channel on our way to Rainbow Bridge, and a boat doing circles while someone learned to ski was not the activity we wanted to be engaging in at that point. But I was assured that I would have a turn before our trip was over. After my dad had finished and had been picked up and everything was gathered back into the boat, it was time for the rest of the long trip to Rainbow Bridge. Rainbow Bridge is 55 miles away from Bullfrog Marina. Our 17-foot boat was capable of traveling at about 30 miles an hour, top speed, so it was about a 2-hour boat ride in each direction. The water skiing had been fun, but it was time to get down to the serious business of covering the 55 miles to Rainbow Bridge. During the trip, my 2 youngest brothers, I had 3 at the time, liked laying under the dash of the boat in the shade. My mom would wet some blankets to put over them and keep them cool. The gentle bouncing of the boat while we sped along would put them to sleep, and they'd wake up none the wiser as to how long we had been traveling. As we got closer and closer to Rainbow Bridge, the boats and waves around us steadily grew larger and larger. We felt like a dinghy among cruise ships traversing the main channel towards the bridge. We had to slow down to avoid capsizing ourselves. Because I was so young, the idea that there were boats as large as what we were seeing was foreign to me. I couldn't believe my eyes. We eventually made it to the canyon opening where Rainbow Bridge was located. There was a buoy sign floating at the front of the canyon with the words Rainbow Bridge Canyon painted in black, along with Proceed with Caution painted underneath in red. We slowed down to look at the sign, and my dad, ever the jokester, said, "That was fun. It's time to go back." Ha ha ha, we all laughed. My dad laughed, pointed the boat up the canyon, and we were on our way to seeing a magnificent sight. The trip up the canyon was longer than I thought it would be, and took a good 10 minutes to slowly proceed from the sign to the arch. As we rounded the final corner, there Rainbow Bridge stood before us. A magnificent red sandstone arch with a top that seemed like 200 feet above the water. The water ran all the way under the bridge at the time, and there were red sandstone cliffs reaching up out of the water to about 10 feet high. Teenagers and young kids were actively jumping off the cliffs into the warm water below. Thankfully, nobody was climbing to the top of the arch to jump. My dad docked the boat next to 15 or 20 other much larger boats, and we climbed onto the dock. Because my brothers were so young, my mom and dad carried them and asked our neighbor to watch my younger brother and me so we didn't do anything silly like fall in the water. I was in a green mesh shirt that was cut above my belly with red shorts and knee-high gray striped socks and a Lifesavers themed white hat. I looked like I belonged in the early 80s, which I was, so it was all good. No way would I wear that outfit now. The trail from the dock to under the arch was a few hundred yards, and we looked in awe as we got closer and closer. The sand crunched under our feet, while the dry, hot air caused beads of sweat to form on our faces. We eventually made our way to the base of the arch and looked straight up to see it towering overhead. Like I said, I originally had no idea what to expect, so this was beyond my expectations. I thought it was so cool to see something I'd heard about, but had no frame of reference as to what to picture. There was no internet back then, so I couldn't have Googled pictures, and I either didn't notice or didn't know what I was looking at if there were postcards with pictures of Rainbow Bridge in the stores at Lake Powell. My favorite part of being at Rainbow Bridge was lying on my back and staring up at it while the sun hid behind it like a shy star. We hung out there for what seemed like an hour and had lunch. Lunch consisted of peanut butter and honey sandwiches along with Country Time lemonade to drink. We also had potato chips and wagon wheel cookies to accompany the sandwich and drink. Because Rainbow Bridge was so far away from Bullfrog, we had to refill our fuel tank somewhere close to it. That place was called Dangling Rope Marina. As before, when we pulled up to the dock to fill our gas tank, we all got out of the boat. The dock worker took command of the boat and began filling it while we went to the store. We went to the store, where there was blessed air conditioning, and each of us got a delectable ice cream bar. I can still feel and taste the hard chocolate shell encompassing the soft vanilla ice cream on the inside. Because it was so hot outside, we had to eat the ice cream before it turned into a melted mess. We did, and fed a bit of the ice cream to the carp, much to our enjoyment, and it was time to head back to Bullfrog. It took us a couple more hours to get back to Bullfrog. We stopped along the way for my dad to pull out his fishing pole and land a few striper bass. I was never much of a fisherman, so I pretty much laid on my back with a towel over my head to stay out of the hot sun. And I slept a bit. Okay, boring fishing ended. Time to move along. We got to a beach filled with driftwood at about 5 or 6 that night, and it was time for dinner. My mom had carefully packed tinfoil dinners for us to eat. We tied up the boat and gathered beach driftwood for the fire. We got to a beach filled with driftwood at about 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock that night, and it was time for dinner. My mom had carefully packed tinfoil dinners for us to eat. We tied up the boat and gathered beached driftwood for the fire. The driftwood was gray and completely dry, so provided excellent fuel. We piled it high, and my dad lit a railroad fusee, more commonly referred to as a road flare, and placed it in among the wood. Within 10 minutes, the fire was burning bright and reducing to the embers on which we would place our tinfoil dinners, also known as hobo dinners. The hobo dinners consisted of ground beef made into the shape of a hamburger, chopped carrots, and chopped potatoes, with a few onions sprinkled on the side. The dinner was wrapped in one layer of tinfoil, then a layer of newspaper, and a second layer of tinfoil. Because of the newspaper, the dinner only slightly charred and was actually really good. Accompanying dinner was a 12-ounce can of Pepsi and stories about my parents' youth while sitting around the campfire. After dinner, we made it safely back to our camp and went to bed for the night. It rained that night. Because our green tent was made of canvas, my parents made it a point to tell us not to touch the sides. They told us that if we touched the sides while it was raining, the rain would seep through and get us wet. I think they even showed us how it happened on a lower part of the tent, and by golly, they were right. We spent the next day in the cove around our campground. As promised, my parents let me try to water ski. Try being the operative word, or more appropriately, do not water ski was what happened. My mom sat in the driver's seat of the boat while my dad got in the water and helped me with my skis. When you first start trying to water ski, one of the hardest parts is controlling your skis while floating in place. Once the rope is tight, it becomes much easier to control them because you have the friction of the water butting up against your skis and holding them steady. I got in the water, and my dad reached underneath me to hold the skis steady while my mom pulled out the slack in the one-handled orange rope. The rope reached its full length, and I was being slowly pulled along behind the boat. My dad talked in my ear and said, "Are you ready?" I said yes, and he said, "Then yell, 'Hit it.'" "Hit it," I yelled. I felt the rope pull me up out of the water. The only problem was that I didn't know how to balance on the water skis and did a spectacular belly flop onto my face. One try down, about a million to go. The next time, with my dad holding my skis, I yelled, "Hit it," and was pulled up. This time, instead of falling face first into the water, I tried to anticipate being pulled forward and leaned backward. Too much of a lean backward happened as I pulled the rope to my chest and this time fell backward into the water. It was a no-go. "Third time's a charm," my parents said. I think they wanted me to ski as much as I wanted to ski. I can relate to that feeling as a parent of my own kids. It's so exciting to see your kids succeed at something that is so challenging at first. So I tried a third time, and a fourth time, and a fifth time. No luck. By the sixth time, I was tired and said I would try the next day. Then it was my babysitter's turn to try her hand at skiing. She was so small that she was able to use my skis and got up and skied after only 1 or 2 tries. I was jealous, but super excited for her. She got to ski several times before we left for the week. That night, we were cruising along the main channel when an unexpected desert thunderstorm infiltrated the lake. It started off as a small squall at first, but then quickly progressed to sheets of rain blowing sideways across the water. The waves were large enough that they were crashing into our boat, and we were all scared. My dad originally turned the boat into the waves to head back towards the marina, but soon discovered that was a bad idea. The bow of the boat would go up about 4 feet in the air, then come crashing down with a heavy splash and water coming into the boat over the bow. Over and over this happened, until we all realized that this was not a plan for success. So my dad made the decision to turn the boat to go with the wind and stay between the crests of the waves. We eventually made it to land, where we found a nice family in a houseboat who welcomed us with open arms. I had never been on a houseboat before, so getting to walk around one was really interesting. The houseboat had a little living room where the captain's chair was located. It was on the beach, out of the wind, and we felt incredibly safe. The storm fortunately died down and we were able to leave, but not without telling the family thank you for helping us out in our time of need. A little editorializing here. One time when my dad was fishing at Lake Powell, his boat ran out of gas and he had to flag someone down for help. The person towed my dad back to the marina for more gas. When my dad offered the gentleman money, the gentleman said no thank you, but I expect that if you ever come across someone who needs similar help, you will do the same. We lived by this rule of helping those in need every time we went to Lake Powell. The next day, we went to Forgotten Canyon, which was only about 30 minutes away from Bullfrog this time. Forgotten Canyon was the location of ancient inhabitants of the area, otherwise known as Fremont American Indians. The ruins were on the side of a cliff in a sort of cutout area where the ancient inhabitants could easily make their way down to the river and back up to their living area in a single day. The ruins were also in the shade, which would have been very important because of the unbearably hot temperatures during the days. Among the ruins, there was a kiva below the ground with a fire pit in the middle, houses above the ground, and lots of tourists looking around at all of this. We took pictures of ourselves there and contemplated what it would have been like to live in such a place in the unrelenting heat. Humans are incredibly adaptable to whatever conditions they are living in. After the trip to Forgotten Canyon, when we got back to the beach by our tent, we got in a water fight. The water fight quickly turned into a mud fight. We were all having fun until someone threw a chunk of mud at my dad and hit him in his face. Part of the gift of being hit in the face with mud was the fact that he also got mud in his eye, which caused quite a bit of pain. My parents spent a long time cleaning the mud from his eye, and his eye was bloodshot for the rest of the day. After this negative mud-flinging experience, we never again got into another mud fight. I tried skiing again this day and failed again. The day before we were to leave, my dad's and mom's hearts were breaking for me because I was still unable to water ski despite multiple attempts at trying. I was nothing if not determined, but I still failed over and over again. Then my dad got a bright idea. What if he put on 2 skis and I rode on his back while he did all the work? I thought that was a great idea. The bay where we were staying didn't have much boat traffic, so that was the perfect place to attempt such a stunt. We took the boat out into the bay and my dad and I got in the water. I could see beams of sunlight shining below the surface into the water. I found a warm spot while I waited for my dad to put on the skis. Once his skis were on, he instructed me to climb on his back, which I did. My mom was driving the boat, and our neighbor and my brother were watching us out the back to make sure we were safe. The rope tightened, and my dad yelled, "Hit it," and we were off. He got up immediately without a problem, and I was in heaven clinging to his back. I felt the spray of the water on my face while my dad skied in and out of the wake and talked to me about how it felt to water ski. I remember feeling free as a bird and incredibly lucky that my dad would do something like that for me. We probably lasted 2 or 3 minutes before my dad's arms got incredibly tired and he let go and waited for the boat to return and get us. But those 2 or 3 minutes seemed like a long, long time. He handed my mom his skis while my brother put out the ladder for us to climb back into the boat. When I was in the boat, all I could do was squeal with excitement. I had finally done this thing I had been wanting to do all my life. My dad asked me what I thought about it, and I said the most appropriate words I could think of. It was awesome. I found out later that my dad lost a lot of strength in his hands and forearms because of this experience. It goes to show that a parent's love for their kids knows no bounds and will do almost anything for them, up to and including permanently injuring ourselves. That is my story for the night. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe, and I'll be back again with more tales from my life.